I have here a pretty standard to-do app. Let's take a look at its performance. When I toggle this to-do, there's a slight delay. I don't know if you can see it, but we'll see it here in the performance tab. So we can see it took 639 milliseconds to toggle that to-do. That's almost an entire second. We got a 2 frames per second frame, which is pretty terrible. We see that rec tree reconciliation took up all the time. There's the huge update right here that took 618 milliseconds, and that's the Connect app. So that's for the app to update. And you see every to-do underneath the app also updated, even though we only toggled a single to-do. If we go here to the React Dev Tools, see that it's even slow. And let's check highlight updates here. Seem to be having a problem with the React Dev Tools. So when you're debugging performance, sometimes your tools can't even handle the app. And there's workarounds for that. So I just clicked out of it and clicked back in, and now that works. And if I toggle this to do, the highlight updates feature is not even working. So let's go in here to the reducers and make this 1,000 to-dos, or let's even make it 100, because the React Dev Tools just can't even handle this example. So let's work with 100. You see the performance problem went away, but we can kind of see the performance problem in here with highlight updates, and that's still not working. So I found that when debugging performance issues, sometimes your tools can be a little finicky, and you need to know certain workarounds, like close the dev tools and go back into it is the first thing you should try. So Redux DevTools works fine, but React actually crashed. It's not even available. So I go to Chrome/extensions in a new tab, and you can find that extension. See, I've got way too many extensions in here. And so there's React. You can just toggle it off and toggle it back on, usually. Usually that'll work. And so now it's in here. If it's not, close DevTools and reopen it again. In fact, I can't even click on it, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to close DevTools and reopen it again. And go to Highlight Updates. So that's an important strategy when debugging performance, is to simplify your examples if your tools aren't working. So now we can see every to-do paints or updates, renders, updates, renders, and paints. So everything is updating, basically. That's because this map state to props here gets called anytime the state changes, and anytime we toggle it to do, the entire object of to-dos also changes. We have a new object with one of the to-dos replaced and the other to-dos are the same, but that parent to-dos object still changes, so everything updates here. So even with just 100 to-dos, we dropped to 14 frames per second, and all of the to-dos updated. So how can we solve this? Well, we've got to think in terms of normalization. So our state's already pretty flat, you may be thinking. All we have is an array of cards, but that's still nested. We have an object inside of an array, right? We have an array of objects nested inside of an array. So picture our state. It's an object. Here's our object at the top level. 2 curly braces is our entire state object, or single state atom. And it's keyed by the ID of the to-do, like 1, 2, 3. Actually, we have an array of to-dos that's not quite accurate. The same concept still applies. So what we want to do is nest it inside of cards by ID, and that's going to be an object indexed by the card's ID. So in there, we can look up a card by its ID very quickly, and we use an object instead of an array because the ID might be alphanumeric. Then we're going to have an array of card IDs. So objects do not have order, arrays do. So we're going to have constant time lookups into cards by ID, and card IDs is going to indicate the ordering. So if you aren't familiar with constant time, you can pause the video and look that up, or I'll do another video about asymptotic analysis. But for now, just follow along. So cards by ID is going to index our objects, and card IDs is going to be the array of IDs, so that we can enumerate all the card IDs. So let's go ahead and refactor to this state shape. It's going to solve the problem, and you'll see why. So I'm going to have an entire reducer, just one reducer responsible for the whole state of this application. So in the load action, I'm going to return an object where cards by ID is our demo cards that I generated randomly here. And I'm going to extract this out to a function. So we can also set card IDs. We'll call this create cards. So I'm going to create function create cards. Oops, sorry about that. So function create cards is going to return our new array of 100 cards, where each one has an ID, a name, and done, which is either true or false. And so I'm going to actually extract this and create a new const cards equals create cards. And then cards by ID, I'm going to pass in the cards. And then for card IDs, I'm going to take the cards and actually take I want the keys of the cards because I want an array. And that's not working. Let's see. So cards is actually an array, not an object. But we can just solve that. So I shouldn't have done object.keys. I should have just mapped over that array, but it's a quick hack. I could pass in the index here. So object keys on the array is going to give me the index, and then I can index into cards. So that fixes cards by ID. I could clean that up a little bit, but that's not super important. The main thing is I got the cards by ID, which is an object with IDs going to each card object, and then card IDs, which is an array of the IDs. So moving on, the add action, which again doesn't really matter for this example app, but I'll just show you here just to make a complete example. The card IDs are going to become a new array where it is the existing card IDs concatenated with the new card ID, and I'll just put the new card ID first. So card IDs becomes a new array with the new card ID and then the existing card IDs following that. And then cards by ID is going to have the new card added to it in our add action. So this handles adding a card. So we need to remember to bring in the existing state, spread in the previous state. And here in the app, or our root component, we're just going to take state.cardIDs. All we want is an array of integers. So unless we've added or removed a card, the app.js will not render. It doesn't need to update. If we toggle the to-do of a card, we only want that card to update. So this is not going to be object.keys because it's already an array of integers. And then these cards here, we don't actually need. All the app.js is going to do is connect to the Redux store and fetch an array of IDs. And so just to kind of simplify this race condition here, I'm going to default out card IDs to an empty array. There's a point in time in which our app started up that that array didn't exist. because we hadn't dispatched the load action. So I'll just default to an empty array. It looks like we got a bug here in the toggle action. So let's update the toggle action. So the cards by ID is going to become a new object with the existing cards by ID where only that one card ID is updated with a new, and that card stays the same except the done property gets toggled. So that works. Our refactoring is complete. We're using the new state. So let's take a look. Still need to update the root component here. So it does not take in cards. It's just going to take in card IDs. So now we're done refactoring the reducers or our Redux store. We're just refactoring the React components. So we don't need that check. We're going to map over the card IDs, and with each ID, we're going to render the card component. The key is going to be the card ID. And we don't have access to the card object here. We just have the ID. So we're going to pass down that ID to the card component. And later we're going to connect the card component to the Redux store. So each card component is going to select the state for its own card. Each card component is going to connect to the Redux store. It's going to take in just the card ID, and it's going to go look up that card object from Redux, because it's going to be connected just like the app is connected. So for now, let's just render the card ID here. So we have all of our IDs. Let's wrap that in a div so we can see that a little better. Okay. And that should be a binding. All right, so there's all our card IDs. So since the card component is going to be connected to the Redux store, we can bring over these imports. You probably won't need all of them, but I'm just bringing them over. And the card component is going to need map state to props and map dispatch to props. So let's copy those and bring those over here at the bottom. So in map state to props, there is a second argument called own props. Sorry, own props. And then so own props is going to be, because we wrap this card in a higher order component and then use that in app.js, whatever props we pass to it in app.js, that's own props. That's the props coming into the connected component, which wraps our card component, which is a presentation component. So map state to props, we're going to get the ID off of the own props. That's what's being passed in app.js. And we're going to look up the card off of the state and pass that as a prop to the card component. So card component just takes in the card, and it's wrapped in a higher order component using connect, just generates the higher order component for us, and that higher order component takes in the ID. Map state to props converts from the ID to the card and passes the card into the inner component. So our inner component here, card, just takes in the card, not the card ID. It's the whole card object. And since we copied this over, it needs to be changed from app to card. So this prop is called card ID, not ID. This is where type checking is super helpful, and I'll do that in another video. Just prevent bugs like that. Let's see, I still got a bug here. Because can't output an object. Objects are not valid as JSX children. So let's make a string, stringify card, with a JSON representation of each card. So there's all of our cards, 0 through 99, with the done status. So each card is going to be responsible for toggling itself. This is idiomatic Redux, so this is a good pattern to follow. You might feel like you're putting containers every level of the way. That is a idiomatic thing in Redux, and you'll see why. So the app component doesn't need to know about toggle. We don't need to pass these callbacks all the way down. So it solves that prop drilling, where we're passing these props down from the app component. So the card component's actually going to be in charge of toggling. So toggle's going to take in the ID here. And I'll just call that ID instead of card ID. Because we're in the card component, we already know it's the card that's being toggled. And we need these actions, so we'll import the actions here. And the card is not going to be responsible for add and load, just toggle. And likewise in the app, it's just doing add and load. It does not need to know toggle. Okay, so that doesn't work yet. Let's take a look at this. So this needs to be wrapped in an arrow function, so we can pass in a parameter. So we're going to do arrow function. We're going to say toggle card.id. And we forgot to pass in map dispatch to props to the connect function. And so this was called card ID, and we changed it to ID. So it needs to be changed over here. So card ID just becomes ID. And it's also right here. And so that works. We can get rid of this debugging code right here. Let's open the inspector, take a look at that performance. So before it was taking over 600 milliseconds when we had 10,000 to-dos, and we saw every card rendered. Now we see React tree reconciliation took 3.5 milliseconds, and only that one card updated. So all we toggled in our state was that one card's done status, and as a result, only that one card updated on the page. So let's go into the React DevTools and take a look. And it's kind of crapped out again, so we'll go close DevTools and go back into it. Remember before when we did highlight updates, they all updated even though we toggled only a single one. Now we see only the card we're toggling updates. So it looks like we solved the performance issue. Let's erase this and change this back to 10,000. because surely a modern web app needs 10,000 to-dos all on one page. And we'll go here to highlight updates. Before, this didn't even work. Now, beautiful, just handles it flawlessly. And let's take a look at that performance. So when I toggle it, it feels much faster. I don't feel any slowdown now. Beautiful, 77 milliseconds. We could improve that further, but that is the scope of this tutorial. So that's advanced Redux performance.